Awesome. And just like that, we are back for this week's episode. A little bit different. So last week we did the AFC. We went through each team, one player that coming up into this 2026 season is or has some sort of pressure. So what I've been doing and what we're going to do this week is go through each team. I have gone through and picked out a player, a coach, could be someone in the front office, someone designated with the team who I think could have a lot of pressure going into this offseason. And then we were going to talk about, what that pressure meter is, if that's a 1 through 10 kind of scenario. And then after we talk through that player, talk about what their pressure rate is, then is the fun part in deciding if that person, player, representative of the team is going to make it or are they going to break it. With that being said, we are going to start off with a good one, and that is the Buccaneers. This one, I honestly have a few options. And if you listen to some of our clips and some of our podcasts, James and I, especially me, have some not so great feelings about this Bucs team. A lot of it is, there's some injuries, of course, but truly just a scenario where you have veterans leaving like Mike Evans, you have people retiring, Devontae Adams, you have mysterious injuries like Bucky Irving especially. And then you just have a situation where no one really likes your head coach in Todd Bowles. And, the idea was to have Liam Cohen be your new potential head coach. And instead of Liam Cohen, you go with Todd Bowles. And it has been just a consistent downfall for this team. So I'm looking at this Bucs team, and I'm looking at Todd Bowles, and I don't see a scenario where the pressure is not a 10 out of 10. Truthfully, I do think he has overstayed his welcome. I do think there are more issues than just Todd Bowles. But at the same time, you have a situation where one of your best players on your team, multiple time Pro Bowler, multiple time All-Pro defensive tackle Vita Vea, is now requesting a trade because he is unhappy with his current contract. And truthfully, he's probably just unhappy with his current team, and especially the head coach. So with Todd Bowles, to me, this is a 10 out of 10 on the pressure rate. And I do think there's a high chance that Todd Bowles breaks going into next year and is not the head coach for the Bucs next year. It's a big one. I mean, we start off pretty strong here. Going into another NFC South team, that is the Saints. This one's fun to think about because this Saints team is very young. And truthfully, they had some really great moments last year. Before every season, James and I talk about what teams we think will be the most disappointing, what teams are going to be the biggest surprises. And we both agreed that the Saints last year was going to be the most disappointing team. I think there were times where we didn't even have them getting a win. So for the fact it's the Saints did really well this past year, considering the young amount of talent this team has, a first-time head coach. But with every team, there are players that have this pressure. And to me, I think it's Kendry Miller. I think Kendry Miller was in a perfect role to become that bruising back that Mark Ingram once was, that what they wanted Jamal Williams to be. And I think he was supposed to be that perfect 1-2 piece with Alvin Kamara. The only issue is injuries, man. Injuries have completely killed its momentum. And then you bring in the fact that they go and they sign Travis Etienne to this big contract. They re-sign Alvin Kamara. This is a very competitive running back room. And truthfully, Kendry Miller has done nothing to really stand himself out. Plus, it does not help that he's consistently on injury reserve. So for a third string running back, his pressure is pretty high. And I truly do not believe that Kendry Miller makes it this year. I do think he breaks. I just think it's too competitive in the roster and the running back room, and consistently being on injured reserve is not the best thing to do to be on an NFL team. Availability is the best ability, and if you can't stay available, you're not going to play. So following that up, we now have the Falcons. Man, I think this one's probably the easiest when it comes to identifying who the player's going to be. That's Michael Penix. I think before this past season, you can make a true argument with Kyle Pitts, but to me, it's Michael Penix. His footwork is a big topic of discussion. He was drafted to be a long-term starter. Michael Penix, when he's played, he just has not shown that ability to be a true franchise quarterback. And then this year, which would have been his first year without true quarterback competition, they go and they sign Tua Tagovailoa, who I agree with. I think that's a great choice. They're talking about in camp where it's pretty neck and neck. Tua currently has the starting bid over Michael Penix. To me, Michael Penix is coming into the season with a massive amount of pressure on him. And just from what we've seen, him playing, him injured, consistently getting benched for his backup quarterbacks, To me, I don't think Michael Penix is that long-term starter. I don't think he makes it out of this season. Wow, 3 teams, 3 breaks to start off. After that, we have the Panthers. This is very similar to last week when I was talking about CJ Stroud, with a quarterback that has shown a lot of promise, but his consistency, another thing like Michael Penix, is very, very low. Bryce Young has not dealt with many injuries, which is different than CJ Stroud and Michael Penix. But you can also argue he's not had much help between his offensive line, his running back room, as well as wide receivers compared to those other teams, those other 2 quarterbacks especially. I do think because this is going to be Bryce Young's last year of his contract, especially you are a former first overall quarterback, it's very, very, very difficult to find your franchise quarterback. I do think the pressure rate is extremely high. I don't think this Panthers team is necessarily ready to compete right away. I know they made some really extreme and aggressive offseason moves, especially in that defense. Devin Lloyd, Jalen Phillips to kind of upgrade that. I just don't think this offense, wide receivers, running back, Bryce Young, tight end especially, comes close to a team that's ready to compete for not just for the playoffs, but for the Super Bowl. Last week, I had the same scenario with CJ Stroud. I said very high pressure, but I did say that he was going to make it coming into next season. I think it's kind of the same with me. I think as much as inconsistent that Bryce Young has been throughout his career so far, I just think it's too hard to get to truly find that franchise quarterback. And Bryce Young has shown enough flashes where I truly do believe Bryce Young is going to make it past this next year and potentially sign that big extension and hopefully can succeed more than what he has in the past already. Now we're moving up to the NFC North. We have the Packers. This one, it made it a lot easier coming up with a player this offseason because there's been a lot of commotion and talk surrounding Josh Jacobs. Obviously, there is the off-the-field issues that has come up this offseason. I don't know enough of the situation. That's not me to say who was in the right, who was in the wrong, but I can look from an outside perspective and as a football fan, especially considering his impact on the field. Josh Jacobs last year was far and away not even close to what he was the year prior. This is a guy who was a All-Pro 2 years ago, and then last year, between injuries, between inconsistencies, between just the fact that he is a bell cow running back and he's getting up in age, he had a really poor year. I do think Josh Jacobs is coming into this year with a lot of pressure to sustain and to show that he is that running back that was drafted in the first round. He is that running back that broke records for the Raiders. He is that running back that has I believe, second team All-Pro nod under his belt. It's a lot of pressure because of this. We have seen year in, year out, the last probably 10 to 15 years, that other than maybe a few exceptions, running backs do not stay in their prime very long and do not, especially with very high amounts of carries, do not last in this league. And I do think Josh Jacobs is coming along that line of, he's been a bell cow running back his whole career. Dealt with a little bit of injuries last year, dealt with some off-the-field issues. I don't necessarily believe that he is going to come back and be as impactful as he was 2 years ago. So with that being said, former All-Pro Josh Jacobs, this is not a break for me. Continuing in the NFC North, we now go to the Minnesota Vikings. And this one's another situation where you could truly have a few different players. I was in between a few. I think the biggest story in this offseason, especially last year, was JJ McCarthy. And while I do believe this is also a make or break scenario for JJ McCarthy, I do think that because of the addition of Kyler Murray and over the last years, we have seen quarterbacks have that ability to revive their careers post their rookie contract. Thinking Sam Darnold, Geno Smith, Baker Mayfield. These are quarterbacks that after their rookie contracts, they've gone to maybe a different team, different place, different location, scenario, and have come out on top. Therefore, I'm not necessarily putting this on JJ McCarthy because he's had so many talks this whole offseason of, is he the starter? Can he do what Sam Darnold did earlier with the Vikings? So taking JJ McCarthy out of it, I have this as Jordan Addison. Jordan Addison's a former first round pick. He is a former Blendenkoff Award in college. He was supposed to be one of the better receivers in his draft. There's been more commotion with Jordan Addison about the offseason issues, about consistently getting into legal trouble than there has with him truly in the season. He is the wide receiver 2, with Justin Jefferson, wide receiver 1. And honestly, he was probably wide receiver 3 last year with Jalen Naylor being able to be the most consistent receiver. So to me, it's another situation where I do think Jordan Addison has a lot of pressure going into this upcoming season. Because he's about that time where he is going to be on one of those last years of his contracts. He's out for an extension. It's difficult because he's obviously not the wide receiver 1 with Justin Jefferson there. But we've seen plenty of wide receiver 2s get a lot of money. Jameson Williams, T. Higgins, for example. It's so difficult to me because of the offseason issues that he's consistently getting in as a player. I don't think he makes it past this year. I think the Vikings are more upset that they lost Jalen Naylor this past offseason, which might indicate something with being able to keep Jordan Addison or having to lock him in for long term. But from an outside perspective, looking at this team, I do think Jordan Addison's not going to be on this team after this season. We have 2 more teams in the NFC North. We have the Bears. Bears were one of the teams last year that honestly kind of exploded, did a lot better than a lot of people predicted, including myself. Ben Johnson came in and did Ben Johnson things, exploded this offense, let Caleb Williams truly become more of himself, as well as really, really excite this run game. Upgrade offensive line. They're able to do a lot of things, but that does not mean that they take away from all the issues they've had in the past. And one of those is the consistent rotation of corners. You look at this Bears roster, they do have one of the best corners in the league, and that is Jalen Johnson. When he is healthy, he's one of the best lockdown perimeter corners. You look at the other players in their room, and you have Kyler Gordon, another situation where he is one of the best slot corners when he can stay healthy. Nashawn Wright this past year was outstanding for what they thought they were getting in him. The guy's been bounced around the league, guy who led his position group in interceptions. But I'm looking at Tyreek Stevenson. This is a former second-round pick from the University of Miami. This was supposed to be your outside corner, a guy who may not necessarily have all the ball skills, but will go in and absolutely hit someone in the run game. Honestly, after 4 years of Tyreek Stevenson being in the league, his most notable play is him letting up the Hail Mary touchdown by Noah Brown versus the Commanders. So honestly, the pressure for Tyreek Stevenson is extremely high. And that is just because he's had plenty of opportunities with so many injuries in that cornerback room, and he has not succeeded in allowing his play to truly speak for it. I do think Tyreek Stevenson should be in line for another breakout year. My only issue is I don't think he's going to make it. I think he is going to truly break this upcoming season. Following that, we have our last team in the NFC North, and that is Jameson Williams. This one's interesting as well because J-Mo did go ahead and sign an additional contract, I believe 2 off seasons ago, where he's getting paid about $25 million a year, which is a lot, especially for a wide receiver 2, and especially for a wide receiver that is kind of strictly a one-dimensional receiver. J-Mo is very much that deep threat. You give him any other type of responsibility and it's not always super pretty. We've seen that last year, the year before, where he had just uncanny drops from trying to scheme up a lot of plays just for him. There's a few concerns. This offense just was not as explosive last year. Part of that was injuries. David Montgomery got injured at one point, Sam Laporta, but also Jared Goff did, of course. This J-Mo is very much a situational, one-dimensional receiver. And if you can't scheme up plays for him to be strictly down the field, then he's not going to be super productive for you. I do think his pressure rate going into the season is about a 5 out of 10 because he did have a productive year. He did have over 1,000 yards. I just don't think he will ever become that wide receiver 1. I do think he stays about a 5 out of 10 going into this upcoming year. I think his entire offense, Dan Campbell, as well as all kind of on the hot seat currently. And I do think because of that contract, because they know what they have in J-Mo, I do think the pressure goes a little bit under, about a 4 out of 10. And I do think he makes it. I think this goes to our second make of tonight. That is the NFC North and the South. So now we're going to flip switches and go to the NFC East. First off, 49ers. This past season, the 49ers dealt with the injury bug like they do every season. So it wasn't necessarily difficult to come up with a player. There was just a lot of different players you could have potentially put in this spot. and you could have a lot of different conversations regarding those players. I did go ahead and put Dre Greenlaw as the player that I think could be hot on the pressure. Maybe he's on a 1-year deal now. He was really good as that number 2 linebacker behind Fred Warner. Obviously, it was the Super Bowl where he blew his, I believe it was his Achilles, went over, got a new contract by the Broncos, did okay, dealt with a lot of injuries in the offseason, which led to very consistent play, and then without the season even fully concluding, he was cut once again. So I think the hope is you bring him back as a 49er. You're hoping that he doesn't have to take as much responsibility, and you're hoping he can rehab a little bit better and become what he once was, which was a very, very, very efficient linebacker. I think the pressure is low because of the circumstances set prior, but I do think he makes it. I do think this gives him another offseason, another season to truly come back healthy. And while I don't necessarily believe he'll be as effective as he was in a Super Bowl run, I do believe that he will be able to be productive. Coming down to some of these teams left, we have the Arizona Cardinals. Yeah, big thing here is I do have Darius Robinson. This is a former 2024 first-round pick. This is a guy that's honestly just kind of getting lost in the depth chart currently. He has not been super productive when he's been on the field. He doesn't quite fit what the Cardinals are looking for in their defense currently. He kind of fit that Jonathan Gannon defense. Now Jonathan Gannon is not the head coach anymore. He is in the same room as Walter Nolan, Calais Campbell, Andrew Billings. Like there's a lot of people in that room now, and they're taking snaps away from Darius Robinson. He can truly get playing time. As a former first round pick, I do think a lot pressure is very, very high for him. Very high. And I hate to say it, but I think it breaks. I don't think he lives up to that first round pick. I just don't believe he is able to be productive after this year. We have a few left, going over to the Super Bowl champion Seattle Seahawks. This is tough because you do have a lot of people that you can have conversations about being on the hot seat. I do have Sam Darnold. Now, everybody's probably going to be upset with me, but just kind of let me talk through this a little bit. The Seahawks are losing their offense coordinator, Clint Kubiak. He is a guy that loves to be able to run the ball. Seahawks ran the ball at the highest clip last year at over 50. Running the ball led to also one of the highest play action clips, which allowed people like Jason to play extremely well. My concern with Sam Darnold this year is without that same offensive scheme, without the safeties and linebackers being almost sucked in every single play with a play action, with a handoff, that teams are not going to respect the run as much, especially with Kenneth Walker now on the team and where Zach Charbonnet out for at least almost the entire season. Yes, you did go and draft Jadarian Price, but this just kind of puts a lot more on the plate of Sam Darnold, who has shown in the past that he can do a lot of things when given the opportunity to. He had a fantastic season. Another very productive wide receiver in Justin Jefferson. But we kind of did see the fact that once the playoffs started, he completely shut down. And I am scared, if I was a Seahawks fan, that the same thing is going to happen again without a run game, that Sam Darnold is going to almost implode on himself if they make the playoffs. So that being said, I do think because you're coming off the Super Bowl, the pressure should be a 2 out of 10. I think if you didn't think about the fact that you're running a whole new offense, it's the only reason why I wouldn't put it at 1 out of 10. And I do think he makes it. This defense is fantastic. I think this offense is going to take a huge step back this upcoming year. I do think Sam Darnold makes it. I just don't think he's going to be nearly as productive as he was last year. Following the same division, our last team for the NFC West, we have the Rams. What an offseason, honestly. I mean, you go out and you trade for Trent McDuffie, make him the highest paid corner. You go and get his teammate Jalen Williams to come in and be your opposite corner. You go and you trade from Myles Garrett. First time that a MVP and a Defensive Player of the Year of that previous year are now on the same team. You have arguably the best receiver in the league in Puka Nacua. You have the guy who just led the league in touchdowns, Devontae Adams. You have a really good running back, Kyren Williams. This team has everything. So it was difficult to kind of come up with a player who I think could potentially be on that hot seat. I did decide to go with Tyler Higbee for a few reasons. First of all, Tyler Higbee has a big contract. It is coming up to the very end of it. He is also a player that has dealt with injuries. The last few years, he's had significant knee injuries. It's also noteworthy that the last 2 drafts, the Rams have gone and drafted a tight end in the second round. Last year, or this past draft, it was Max Clare from Ohio State. Year before, Terrence Ferguson from Oregon. You don't really double dip in second round tight ends unless you have a potential idea that one of them will become your future starter. I do understand that 13 personnel has become a huge thing in the last few years, and that the Rams do run it at one of the highest rates. My counterpoint is they do have Colby Parkinson, who has taken significant snaps at that tight end one, who truthfully is that tight end one until Tyler Higbee becomes fully healthy if he is still on the team. So all that being said, I do think the pressure meter for Tyler Higbee is very, very high going into this offseason, looking at potentially maybe an 8 out of 10. And that's not necessarily talking about him as a player, but that is talking about the injuries that he has had, as well as the competitive depth chart with both Terrence Ferguson and Max Clare and Colby Parkinson all potentially taking snaps in that 13 personnel. So because of that and the flexibility of the cap, which they're desperately going to need coming up, I do mean this is another break for a player. Okay, we have the final division, the NFC. That is going to be the NFC East. First team I'm going to start off with is the Giants. This is a team that's going through a whole new coaching scheme. They brought in John Harbaugh. He is hopefully going to be able to unlock Jackson Dart a little bit. He can come in and have hopefully significant play style to Lamar Jackson, be able to be on the run a little bit more, as well as utilize play action and take a lot of shots down the field. I was thinking of a few different ones. Cam Scabo is one just because of the injury this past offseason, how, does this play style truly work in today's game, as well as the offseason injuries, the consistent media attention that he does get, some of it good, some of it not so good. Defensively, there's a lot of question marks. Is Abdul Carter going to really be able to take that next step? When they obviously traded away Dexter Lawrence, do they have enough players in the middle of that defense to, be able to live without Dexter Lawrence? But I did go ahead and pick Tyler Nubin. Tyler Nubin was a day 2 pick, safety from Minnesota. He came in and was a legitimate, almost day 1 starter. He's had 2 seasons now under his belt, and both of them have been extremely disappointing. Last year, not getting any turnovers. And this is a team that desperately wanted to redo the secondary. Over the last few years, they have brought in plenty free agents, draft capital. I'm thinking Javon Holland, Tyler Nubin, especially, Deontay Banks, recently Paulson Adebo, Cordell Flott. They've put a lot of money and a lot of capital into the secondary, and it's not necessarily been reflective in their performance. There were truly talks of them, potentially them going safety in this upcoming draft. Caleb Downs was a big player, big topic that they could have gone. But to me, I do think Tyler Nubin finally does take that next step this upcoming year and truly does become that safety that he was at Minnesota. He was very productive. Do you have Tyler Nubin making it in this upcoming year? But following over, we do have the Eagles. Jalen Carter just signed a huge extension, making him the highest paid defensive tackle. This one's difficult for me to really put in perspective because when Jalen Carter is on the field, he is a fantastic player, but he is one of those players that comes with a lot of baggage. Jalen Carter has had a lot of off-the-field issues when he's spitting on Dak Prescott, getting ejected. He's also been very productive when he plays. He's some dogs to really step out. He just necessarily haven't throughout his entire career so far. And while his talent is there, I'm not the biggest fan of this contract, especially when you already go and you do pay Jordan Davis. So if Jalen Carter did not sign this contract today, his pressure rate, honestly, to me, would be at 10 out of 10. He's been in a lot of trade talks. I do think the contract does add a little bit of safety into him, which to me is a 5 out of 10. And unless something absolutely crazy happens, I do think he makes it. Now, do I think he's going to be worth that contract in this upcoming year? Not at all. I think it was a complete overpay. But I think this Eagles team is in desperate need of pass rush help, especially losing Jen Phillips. He did trade for John Lee Grenard, who has had a very up and down career so far. I would rather take Milton Williams over Jalen Carter, and I'm just not impressed with this contract. I have 2 more teams. I have the Cowboys. Looking at this Cowboys team, James and I talked about this throughout this whole offseason, has one of the best offenses. Dak Prescott, truthfully, has been an elite quarterback for the last few years. You obviously have Javonte Williams, who had an extreme career resurgence last year. CeeDee Lamb and George Pickens both were fantastic. So in the offensive line, you have a lot of great players, Tyler Smith, Tyler Booker. It was this defense that James and I consistently talked about that were disappointing. Not only that pass rush help, but as well as a lot of spots in like the secondary as well. But a huge part of this for me is they do go and they try to add players in free agency and trade for Rashawn Gary. Rashawn Gary is someone who has had a very up and down career with the Packers. To me, Rashawn Gary will never be that true pass rusher one. He is a situational pass rusher. He was able to come in last year, take a lot of that one-on-one pass rush reps because Michael Parsons was able to take the double teams last year. Devontae Wyatt was. But I think a 4th round pick is a lot for Rashawn Gary. And especially when you do bring in his contract as well. I think the pressure rate for Rashawn Gary is high because they also did go and they add Malachi Lawrence from this draft class. And they have Donovan Ezeraku. They have players that can potentially take reps away from Rashawn Gary with higher upside. And with that pressure rate, I do think this comes back as a poor trade from the Cowboys side. I do think this is a break-it situation. We have one more team, and that is the Commanders. This team was obviously very, very disappointing. You go from a year where you have a rookie quarterback, Jalen Daniels, you have a situation where this team makes it to the playoffs, has some incredible games, a Hail Mary to win a game. And then last year, Jalen Daniels goes down with injury, which is understandable. Injuries happen to everyone. But Dan Quinn being a defensive-minded coach, this defense was terrible. They weren't able to get much pass rush. They had Bobby Wagner was out there, was playing, but he could not cover. Time and time again, corners, secondary was getting completely burned. And then offensively, they've had situations with Scary Terry where he's been upset about contracts. They don't have a consistent running game. Last year where Jalen Daniels went down with injury, then came back, went out, then he got hurt a second time. As an outside perspective fan, I don't necessarily know how I feel about this Commanders team. I think 2 years ago, they got extremely lucky, all things considered. And I think last year, they won maybe 4 games. I do think they'll be somewhere in the middle. I do think they will probably have about 7 to 8 wins this year. But if they do have less than 7 to 8 wins, I do think Dan Quinn will end up being out head coach. I think, and that part of that is strictly because the way that they treated Jalen Daniels and his injury, especially when there's history of players like Robert Griffin, who was rushed back from injury and a playoff in a game and led to minimal long-term. I think the pressure rate for Dan Quinn is max. I think if they aren't able to make it back to the playoffs, which I don't believe they will, he's gone. I think Dan Quinn after this year, I think he's off the team. I think he's fired. I think they go out with someone else. But to me, this team just has not enough talent to make it. And I don't think Dan Quinn can really, use the luck that he used earlier 2 seasons ago and will this team back to the playoffs. Pressure meter and make or breaks. Thank you everyone for tuning in, and I will see you guys next time.